I used to hate Sundays. They came with a certain silence I could never quite explain. A hollowness in the walls, like the world was pausing for breath. And I was the only one who heard it exhale. When I was younger, Sundays meant the ticking of the old brass clock above the fireplace on Pine Hill Lane. Me and him, my father, sitting in a room too big for how little we said. I remember the stale scent of his aftershave clinging to the tweed of his jacket, the way the sunlight dusted through the bay window like it was trying not to wake us. I think that's where the memory begins, in silence. Back then, the clock always ticked louder on Sundays. Not because it was broken, because it was the only thing moving in the room. He'd sit in his corduroy chair, legs crossed, glasses low on the bridge of his nose, pretending to read the paper. I'd sit on the ottoman, because I didn't want to break the silence by turning the TV on. Sometimes I think he wanted to speak. His lips would twitch, part slightly, then close again like he was swallowing something sour. Or sacred. I was 12 when I noticed his hands tremble. Not a shake exactly, more like the kind of vibration a plucked string makes right after the note sounds. Subtle, sad. I remember watching them lift the cup of black coffee to his mouth. He always drank it bitter, said sugar made it childish. Funny thing is, I remember all this now, because of the care home. The one on the edge of town, with the smell of lemon disinfectant and old books. They asked me if I wanted to keep the clock, said it was going to be donated otherwise. I said yes, even though I swore I'd never set foot in that house again. So here I am, 38, sitting in my kitchen with that same brass clock above my fridge, ticking like it never aged. My wife says I stare at it too much, that it makes me distant. Maybe it does, but it's not the clock, it's the ghosts it holds. They told me he started forgetting things 3 years ago. Names first, then how to work the kettle, then where he lived. But it was the Sundays that killed me. He stopped recognizing the day. Every time I visited, he asked what day it was. Every time I said Sunday, he blinked like I'd just told him I'd been gone for months. Sunday? He'd repeat. Is that today? Like the word was foreign. Like it no longer held weight. He died in his sleep. Last month. They called me at 4:23 in the morning. The nurse said he looked peaceful, that he didn't suffer. But what do they know about suffering? Suffering isn't how you die, it's how you live with what's missing. The day after the funeral, I went back to Pine Hill. Everything smelled like cedar and mothballs. His records were still on the shelf. I ran my hand along the spines, each one dusty and untouched. Nat King Cole, Miles Davis, Ella Fitzgerald. I remember him humming to Unforgettable when he thought I wasn't listening. There was this one Sunday, I must have been 7, he danced with my mother in the kitchen while the roast burned in the oven. She laughed and scolded him, but didn't stop dancing. Her laugh was wild then. He used to call it her thunderclap. She left when I was 9. Another silence, a heavier one. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because the clock is ticking louder tonight. Or maybe because I found something in the drawer beneath the fireplace. It was a letter, addressed to me, unsent, folded 3 times. My son, it began, I don't know how to speak to you when I look in your eyes. And that's all I could read before I folded it back up. I wasn't ready. Not yet. But maybe next Sunday, I will be. The letter stayed folded on my nightstand for 3 weeks. Every Sunday, I picked it up, ran my thumb along the crease like it was the spine of a wound I wasn't ready to open. The edges were soft, curling like old leaves. I thought about fire, about lighting a match and watching it curl into nothing. But even then, I knew I couldn't. That paper was him, his voice, bottled. My therapist says grief is a spiral staircase. You go in circles, but each time you pass the same place, you're a little higher or lower. I don't know. All I know is that letter made the walls breathe. I finally opened it last Sunday. My son, I don't know how to speak to you when I look in your eyes. That line again, like it was staring back at me. Like he'd written it knowing I'd only ever read it when he was gone. He went on, said things I didn't expect. That he was sorry, that he missed the sound of my footsteps on the stairs, that he watched me grow up from behind a kind of glass he didn't know how to break, that every time I asked him a question about Mom, He lied, because the truth scared him. He wrote, "Your mother didn't leave because of you. She left because I couldn't hold her in the places she ached." I stopped there. I read it 10 times. That sentence broke something open in me. A box I had nailed shut with every unanswered question, every half smile he gave me, every chore we did side by side in complete silence. I remember the Sunday after she left. He didn't speak, didn't cook, didn't play his records. He just sat on the porch until the sky turned black. The neighbors brought over a pie. He didn't touch it. I did. It tasted like dust. I started going through the attic today. Don't ask me why. Some instinct maybe. Or maybe the house whispered it. Old houses do that. You know, they hum with the secrets they're tired of holding. There was a box marked C, just that. The letter, inside, photographs, dozens. Some of me as a kid, laughing with jelly on my cheeks. Some of Mom and him curled on the couch. But the ones that stopped me were the ones I'd never seen. Him, alone, in the garage, bent over a wood project. Him at the beach, years before I was born, holding a sand-covered beer bottle. Him with tears in his eyes at what must have been his father's grave. He'd hidden his humanity in that attic. Beneath the photos was a cassette, labeled Rainy Sunday. I almost didn't play it, but curiosity is its own kind of haunting. I found my old Walkman in a box of my things. Mom never took. Miraculously, it still worked. The tape word clicked, then came alive. His voice, younger, lighter. "Charlie," he said. "My name. My childhood name. You're asleep in the other room. It's storming, and I don't know why. I'm talking to a machine. Maybe because it listens better than I do. Maybe because I'm scared I'll forget how you sound, how you breathe." The tape hissed for a while, then a sound, distant thunder, rain against glass. "I don't say it enough, but I love you. I'm just bad at showing it. Your mother says I carry grief like a second skin, that I choke on joy before I let it in." The tape cut off mid-sentence. That was it. I sat on the floor for a long time, listening to nothing. The silence was louder than anything I'd ever known. I think he wanted me to find it. All of it. The letter, the tape, the photographs. As if in death, he finally found a way to speak. I played the tape again. This time, I cried. Not the kind of crying that crashes down all at once, but the slow leak, the kind that sneaks out from the corners of your eyes like rain, through a cracked ceiling. Then, I did something strange. I made a pot of black coffee, bitter, no sugar. I sat in the same spot he used to sit in. Corduroy chair, long gone. But the sun still hit the carpet the same way. And for a moment, I could feel him, just there, on the edge of the room, breathing with me. I whispered, "I hear you now," and the clock ticked. It was the smell that brought me back. Not the sharp tang of sawdust or the old engine oil he kept in a rusted tin, but the faint scent of pine and sweat, the way the garage used to smell when he worked late on Sunday nights, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, eyes focused in that reverent, distant way, like the wood spoke to him, and he was only there to listen. I opened the door slowly, like I was stepping into a memory I didn't belong in anymore. The dust floated thick in the slats of sunlight, piercing through the warped side window. I saw the workbench first, untouched. Tools still hung meticulously on the pegboard, each one outlined in faded marker like he feared they'd forget where they belonged. There was a single stool, the leather top cracked, stained from years of varnish and time. I sat on it, slowly, half expecting to be scolded. Even now, my body flinched at the echo of his voice in my memory. "That's not a toy, Charlie. Respect the craft." Respect the craft? I stared at a small block of unfinished wood on the bench. It was half sanded, the corners softened like he'd paused mid-thought and never returned. I picked it up. It was smooth, still warm in some imagined way, like the ghost of his hand lingered there. I don't know what made me open the drawer, beneath the vise. Maybe something moved. Maybe grief makes us search in places we never dared. Inside was a notebook. Brown leather cover, aged like the skin on his knuckles. I flipped it open. Sketches. Dozens. detailed plans, little notes in his rigid, all-capital handwriting. June 1992. Treehouse, Joyce. August 1995. Bench for November 2003. New fray for family photo. My breath caught on that last one. November 2003. That was the year I broke my arm falling from the swing. The one he built after she left. The one I used every Sunday when I couldn't find the words to tell him I missed her. The frame he built. It was for a picture of the three of us, back when things still held. I remember it. It sat in the hallway, between the bathroom and the linen closet. When I broke the glass during a tantrum at 15, he didn't yell, just picked it up quietly, like a broken relic. In the back of the notebook, I found a photograph folded in half. Black and white, him, sitting on the garage floor, a baby cradled in his arms. Me, he was smiling. Not the polite kind. Not the strained half-grimace I got after school. This was different. Unfiltered. Wild. Like he had just discovered the sun. I closed the notebook and leaned back, letting the air settle. The garage, it seemed, had not moved. It waited. Like it always had. Like it knew something I didn't. And in that stillness, I began to speak aloud to him. I didn't know you tried this hard, I whispered. And it hit me. My whole life. I thought he was stone, cold, silent, distant. But he wasn't absent. He was just buried, under layers of fear and inherited silence. He didn't know how to raise a son with softness. His father taught him that grief was weakness, that love was labor, not language. I stayed in that garage until night came. The air turned damp and gold. I heard the clock inside strike 7. I whispered again. You were trying, weren't you? And maybe it was the wind, or maybe it was madness, but I swear I heard a creak above me, as if the rafters were sighing. Before I left, I placed the photo and notebook back just as I'd found them, but I took the block of wood. I don't know why. Maybe because it felt unfinished, like us. Back in the house, I placed it on the windowsill, let the morning light catch it, and for the first time since he died, I felt something open. Not joy, not sorrow, something in between, like the breath before you say a name out loud. It stopped ticking. I woke up Sunday morning to an eerie stillness. Not the kind born of peace, but the kind that hums with absence. I walked into the kitchen, drawn by habit or hope, or something between them, and there it was, silent. The brass clock, dead. I tapped the glass. Nothing. I opened the back and nudged the hands. Still nothing. No click, no resistance. Just the quiet surrender of time, refusing to move. I don't know why it rattled me so much. I've lived long enough to understand objects don't hold people, that clocks don't grieve. But something about it going silent, it felt like he had taken the last sound of him with him. As if by dying he'd pulled the rhythm of my world out, by the root. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the thing like it owed me an answer. For a moment, I saw his hands again, weathered, knuckled, moving with slow patience as he wound that very clock every Sunday at noon. He never missed it, never forgot. Even when I thought he forgot everything else, he remembered the clock. I remember the first Sunday he couldn't wind it. He was still living at home then. We hadn't yet admitted what was happening, not out loud, but I noticed him hovering by the fireplace, holding the key in his palm like a riddle. I can't find the he had said, trailing off. It's okay, Dad, I had offered, I've got it. And he had smiled, a little too long, like my voice took a minute to register. Back then, I chalked it up to age. Now I know better. I carried the clock to the table and opened it again. It was clean, perfectly so, like he'd been maintaining it until the very end. I wound it carefully. I've seen him do it 100 times. Nothing. Then I noticed something. Tucked behind the panel, inside the curve of the casing, was a tiny folded slip of paper. My heart kicked. I pulled it out, fingers trembling like they used to when I tried to ask him if he loved me. On it, in his rough, precise script, if this ever stops ticking, it means it's time to listen. I stared at those words like they were a key or a curse. Listen to what? The house? My own breath? The weight of all the things I never said? I walked through the rooms. The living room still smelled like dust and old wool. His chair sat, undisturbed. The cushion sagged slightly, in the middle, molded to the shape of him. I sat in it. It felt like forgiveness. I listened. From upstairs, I followed the sound, up past the photos I hadn't dared to take down, past the guest room, into his bedroom. The door was cracked open. It hadn't been opened since the day I packed his clothes into boxes for Goodwill. The sound was coming from the closet. Inside, a small ancient radio sat on the floor. It was on. Not loud, but just enough. The tune? Nat King Cole. Unforgettable. That song. That one Sunday. My mother's laugh. The roast burning. The slow dance in the kitchen. I dropped to my knees, hands over my mouth. He'd rigged the radio somehow. Maybe on a timer. Maybe connected to the clock. But it didn't matter. It played now. It was his voice, in another form. One last gesture. A reminder. Not everything stops. Some things wait to be heard. I sat there until the song ended. Until the static returned. Then, and only then, did I cry. Not for the silence, but for the sound I almost missed. The first time I walked into Marigold Memory Care, I held my breath. Not out of fear. Exactly. It was something older than fear. A kind of shame mixed with longing, like walking into a room you'd abandoned but left a piece of yourself in. The air inside was sweet and sterile, as if someone had tried to scrub the past out of it. The nurse greeted me with a smile that felt too rehearsed. "Mr. Hale? Right this way, he's in the West Wing. Room 21. It had been 6 months since I last saw him conscious. I had visited before, briefly. Dropped off new slippers, a photograph, some books he no longer remembered how to read. But I hadn't stayed. I hadn't spoken to him since he forgot my name. Now, I was coming back. For me, room 2014 smelled like warm bread and ammonia. He was sitting by the window, bathed in pale afternoon light, staring out at a patch of garden that looked like it had been painted in watercolors. He looked older than I remembered, not just aged unfastened, like the threads that once held him together were unraveling in slow, invisible pulls. His hands were folded in his lap, twitching slightly. That familiar tremor. I stood in the doorway for too long. The nurse gave me a look, something between compassion and caution, before leaving me alone with him. "Hi, Dad," I said softly. No response. I stepped inside, heart pounding. It felt like stepping back into a conversation we never finished. "It's me, Charlie." His eyes flicked toward me, slow as rust. And for one unbearable second, I saw nothing behind them. Then, "Charlie." A whisper. Like the word had dust on it. I sank into the chair across from him. We sat in silence, as we always had. But this one felt different, less like absence, more like waiting. "I read your letter," I said. His lips pressed together, a flicker of recognition, or maybe wind. It's hard to tell, with memory. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the block of wood, the one from the garage. He blinked, eyes drawn to it like it was familiar. "You were making something." Before all this. He took it from me, slowly, held it like it was fragile, like it was me. What is it?" he asked. "I don't know. You tell me." He turned it in his hands. "Feels like a birdhouse. Or a music box." Then, soft, "A gift." My throat tightened. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a second, a heartbeat, I saw him. Not the man time had thinned out, but the father who used to carry me on his shoulders. The man who tried and failed and tried again in silence. "I didn't know how to talk to you," he said, the words like dry leaves. "I know," I replied. We sat together until the sun dipped below the hedgerows and the garden outside folded into shadow. A nurse tapped gently at the door. "Just a few more minutes, Mr. Hale." He nodded, and I stood. "Can I come again next Sunday?" I asked. He blinked. "Sunday," he echoed. "Yeah." He looked out the window again. "I think I'd like that." As I left, I heard something behind me. The softest sound. Humming. Low. Familiar. Unforgettable. The next Sunday, I brought him a coat. It was late October, The kind of day where the sky forgets how to hold color. Pale gray, soft rain, leaves cartwheeling across the pavement like they had somewhere important to be. I parked beneath the maple tree outside Marigold. The leaves were turning, a loud, brittle kind of red. Room 2014 was quiet when I entered. He was asleep in the chair by the window. His hands were curled slightly, fingers resting against each other like folded paper. I watched him breathe for a moment. Shallow, rhythmic. I hadn't realized how much comfort could live in a chest rising and falling. When he stirred, his eyes landed on the coat draped over my arm. "That yours?" he asked, voice gravelly with sleep. "No," I said. "Yours." He didn't respond right away. Then he nodded. We walked slowly down the corridor, past nurses and half-heard television sets, past lives spilling softly out of other rooms. He took my arm, not out of need, but trust. It struck me how strange and sacred that small gesture was. The courtyard garden was empty. Wind moved the wind chimes lazily. I guided him to a bench under the awning. Rain tapped on the leaves, like a memory, trying to get in. "You used to rake the yard every Sunday," I said. "Even in the rain. Remember that?" He was quiet. "I remember you hated it," he finally said. "Said the trees just made a mess again the next day." "I still hate it." He chuckled, a sound so rare now it almost startled me. He looked down at his hands. "She used to love the smell of wet leaves." "Your mother said it reminded her of the farm she grew up on." "I didn't know that." I looked at him. There was something tentative in his face, like he was waiting for permission. "She left because I stopped listening," he said. Not to her words, to her silence. I swallowed hard. "You always heard mine," I said. "You just didn't know what to do with it." The wind picked up. A few leaves spun down and landed between our feet. He bent slow, careful, and picked one up. "These used to be bright," he murmured. "They still are. You just have to see them from the right distance." He turned the leaf in his hand. "Did I lose you back then?" "Not completely," I said, "but it got close." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry I didn't know how to be better. I think you were trying to be human. That counts." The rain thickened. He didn't seem to mind. After a while, I pulled the coat tighter around his shoulders. He looked small in it, not diminished, just softer. We sat there until the garden blurred with water and dusk. He reached for my hand before we went back in. "Same time next week?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Every Sunday." And for once, the word felt whole. The Sundays began to stitch themselves into something sacred. Not in the way church might, but in the way a familiar song does, softly, insistently, pulling something old from your ribs. Each visit was the same, and not always him. Always me. Always the same bench under the awning, the same paper cup of over-steeped tea. The nurse handed me with a knowing look. Always the sky, pressing low. Today, the sky was a deeper grey, that almost blue kind of sadness. He was waiting for me. That was new. He had his coat on already, crooked and inside out, one arm through the wrong sleeve. The nurse gave me a thumbs up as I straightened it, and for a moment, we laughed. He and I, real unguarded laughter, the kind that tasted like boyhood. I helped him outside. The wind was colder this time. He talked more than usual, about nonsense and memory, sometimes both. He told me about a treehouse he built once. For me, I remembered that. Barely. It was too high, I said. He smiled, a little lopsided. "You wanted it that way, said you liked being above the birds." I hadn't remembered that. A pause fell between us. "I didn't get to keep much from before," he said, "but I kept that one. That laugh. You had it when you saw the world from up there." The words caught in my throat. "You've been different," he added, quieter now. "Since the clock." I didn't ask how he remembered that. "Feels like something turned," he continued. "Like we're not ghosts to each other anymore." I didn't know what to say, so I reached into my coat and pulled out something new, a small frame, handmade. Sanded smooth. It held a photo of the two of us, taken last Sunday by a nurse. "Is that—" "Yeah," I said. "I made the frame. From that block of wood." He took it like it was glass, like it might whisper. He touched the edges. "It's not perfect. I know. That's good. Neither were we. The wind moved the chimes again. I could feel time brushing past us, not hurrying, just noticing. I forget a lot, he said suddenly. Some days even you. But this feels like remembering. He placed the photo in his lap, closed his eyes. Don't stop coming, he said. I won't. You promise? Every Sunday, I whispered. Even when you don't know who I am. His hand found mine again. Then I'll still know something good is happening. The silence after was deep, but it didn't hurt. It felt like the hush at the end of a prayer. And I stayed. Even after he dozed off. Even after the cold came in and the nurse tapped my shoulder gently. I stayed until the sky faded to indigo. Because this, now, was holy. He called me David. The moment hung between us like breath on cold glass. I didn't correct him. Not right away. I watched the name pass his lips. Soft, uncertain. He seemed proud of himself. Like he'd pulled something from the fog. David, he said again, smiling. You came back, David. My uncle, his younger brother, dead 12 years now. Yeah, I whispered. I'm here. What else was I supposed to say? That the truth would only slip through his fingers again. That reality was just another splinter in a mind already full of fractures. So I let it be. We sat on the bench again, this time without tea. I forgot it. He didn't notice. The wind was dry, brushing brittle leaves across the courtyard like coins across a marble floor. He looked at the trees. Remember when we built that canoe? We never did, but I knew the story. He and Uncle David, the summer of '67. Birchwood, calloused hands, a river that didn't forgive. His eyes glistened, and for a moment I watched him return to that summer, his voice rich and full, describing the way the light hit the water, the scent of sap and sweat, the way David laughed too loudly and rowed like the boat was a race. I said nothing, just listened. And it struck me then, this was still him. Not the man I lost piece by piece, but the one who had lived a life before I ever arrived. A boy, a brother, a dreamer, who carved time into wood and memory. I let him speak until his throat dried. Then I offered my water, and he drank, and he smiled at me with something that looked almost like recognition. You're good to me, David. Always were. I try, I said.
And in a way, I wasn't lying. I was being what he needed.
A familiar shadow, a voice from a time before the forgetting. I wanted to ask him something, anything. Something that would make him remember me. Do you remember the clock? I asked. His eyes flicked up. Sharp. Of course. Brass. Ticked like a heart with something to prove. I felt tears press the backs of my eyes. You wound it every Sunday, I said. He nodded. Like prayer. He reached out suddenly, gripped my hand with surprising strength. Don't let the dust win, he said. I didn't understand, not then, but I nodded. He leaned back, the effort of memory stealing his breath. We didn't speak again that day, but his hand never left mine. Later that night, I looked up old photos of Uncle David. I studied his face, saw pieces of my own in it. My father's smile mirrored there, and I thought about how memory isn't just what we keep, it's what we give, what we hold for each other when the other can't. Maybe I was David, for today, and maybe tomorrow I'd be someone else. But I'd still come, every Sunday. It was the letter that broke me, not the first one, the second. Found wedged in the back of his old dresser, behind a row of socks he hadn't worn since he moved to Marigold. I was helping the staff clean out his room. They said it was standard, now that he needed more assistance, more supervision. He was moving upstairs to the wing with the locks on the doors and the padded floors. It felt like burying him slowly. The letter was unsealed. No envelope. No date. Charlie, it began. If you're reading this, then time has done what time always does. It has taken. But maybe it's also given you something in return. Maybe the silence isn't so loud now. Maybe you found the shape of my love inside the pauses. I sank to the floor. There were no tears. Just that numb, oceanic pressure. The kind that doesn't let you cry until much later, when you're brushing your teeth or tying your shoe and suddenly your chest gives out. He wrote about the first time he held me. Said I looked like I already didn't trust him. That it scared him, how much I looked like her. He admitted he almost left twice, once after she did, and once when I turned 15 and told him I wished he had. I didn't remember saying that, but I believed I did. He forgave me in the letter, said he'd been practicing forgiveness for years, starting with himself. You never knew the worst of me, he wrote, and I never gave you the best. But in between, I hope there were enough Sundays, enough rooms with light, enough clocks ticking. I held the letter to my chest like a child, like it could warm me. That night, I took the frame from his nightstand, the one with our last photo, and replaced the picture with the letter, folded carefully so the words pressed outward, so they could breathe. He didn't know who I was the next Sunday, not even close. He called me Robert, then Samuel, then the man with the eyes. But when I sat beside him and read the letter aloud, he closed his eyes, and for a moment, he smiled. That sounds like something I'd say, he whispered. I didn't answer. I just kept reading. Because sometimes the only way back is through someone else's words. Because sometimes memory is not a mirror, but a map. And I was still following it. The last Sunday, the sky was impossibly clear. It was the kind of blue that makes you ache for something you can't name. I arrived early, too early, and waited in the courtyard. The wind carried a soft sweetness, faint but familiar, like sun-warmed apples or old cedar. He didn't come. The nurse found me, said he hadn't been out of bed since Friday, that he'd been mostly asleep. Quiet, gentle, fading. You can go up, she said. He might not wake, but sometimes they know. Sometimes they wait. I walked the long hallway alone. The second floor smelled different, like linens and antiseptic and lavender. A cruel combination. Room 27. He lay there, smaller than I remembered. Folded into the bed like the sheets were part of him. His eyes were closed. His breath, shallow, but steady. There was no clock in this room. I sat beside him and took his hand. Still warm, still him. I didn't speak at first. There were no more letters, no more framed memories, no more names to call me. Just breath. And then, because it felt right, I began to talk. Not loud, just enough for the space between us. I told him everything. About the block of wood, the song on the radio, the photograph he thought he made, about the way I forgave him, not in one great act, but in 1,000 tiny surrenders. I told him I kept the clock, that it still didn't work, but I didn't mind. I told him I loved him. I don't remember when the silence shifted. Only that it did. His hand, once still, curled weakly around mine. A breath, a murmur. Charlie, that was all. Not an apology, not a revelation. Just my name, the right one. Like a prayer spoken clearly for the first time. And then he was gone. No struggle, no noise, just an exhale that didn't return. I stayed until they came, until the nurse touched my shoulder, until the sun moved. The next Sunday, I didn't go to Marigold. I went to Pine Hill. The house was still waiting. I stood in front of the fireplace and took the clock down. Opened the back, wound it once, slowly. Tick, the sound echoed through me. Tick, time, again. I placed it gently back on the mantel. Then I walked into the garage. The light was soft, dust motes dancing. The workbench sat just as he left it. I picked up a new block of wood. No plan, no sketch, just hands and silence, and the sound of something beginning.